Charles Morris, and thank you for joining us. And we've been around since 2013, and once in a while we have somebody on the show that is really outstanding. And I can sit around and listen to this guy talk all day long. He's very informative, very whirly, and a true blessing. And I know he's been a true blessing to so many people over the years. We had him on the show earlier, and Skip Moen came in and he talked a little bit more about his world and his translation of the Hebrew Bible. Did I say that right? I meant in reference, you do translate the Hebrew Bible, right?
Well, yes, I talk about the way it gets translated.
Right, okay, all right. Just make sure I worded that right. He is very whirly, and when he came on before, he had a chance to tell us a little bit about himself, and I'm going to ask him to do it all over again. Welcome to the show, Skip.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right. Tell us a little bit more about your history.
Well, as I mentioned before, I was born in Seattle and grew up in the Northwest. Ended up going to 5 different universities, have five different degrees, 2 bachelor's, 2 masters, a PhD. After I left Oxford, where I did my PhD in England, I went back to the United States and actually couldn't get a job in the teaching world. It was one of those times in the United States when there were too many professors and not enough students.
Right.
So I ended up actually going to work for AT&T.
Okay.
I worked for them for 5 years and then started my own consulting business, which I did for 20-something years. It was a really interesting transition because I had done all of my work in philosophy and theology, and I ended up in sales.
And, well, actually, that should have made you a real good salesperson.
It actually did. I was one of the top salespeople.
I just bet.
And I got promoted to headquarters and was involved in the disaggregation of all of the operating companies. So I traveled all over the United States and met basically all of the executives from the operating companies, and that allowed me to start my consulting practice, which I did for, as I said, 20 years. But you know, what happened is I put God on the shelf.
Okay.
Because I really, it was very disappointing not being able to teach after I spent all those years, 12 years in college education.
Right.
And I sort of said, okay, well, I'll just go make money, which I did. I made a lot of money.
Yeah. I remember hearing your story, but you had a lot of nice things.
Yeah, I had 3 Ferraris, an AC Cobra, a house in the Caribbean, all that.
See, now, what's funny is that for a lot of people, that's the attention getter.
It might be.
Well, it is. Wait a minute. Because now somebody walking by and they hear 3 Ferraris. Oh, what's going on in here?
That's right.
Who? Now, that's the attention getter. But see, your story gets better.
Yes,
because
actually.
Once they hear that part, now I'm going to let you go ahead and tell the other part because I've heard the story.
Yeah, well, what happened is I actually, as a consultant, I actually started a program that funded nonprofits, charities, boys clubs, girls clubs, community centers, churches, schools, using a product that AT&T had developed but never employed in that way. And I was the only guy in the United States who did it, and it was very, very successful. I was making $180,000 a month.
Wow.
So it was obviously working really well. And I decided after a couple of years that was enough. I didn't have to put up with this anymore. I left everything and moved to the Caribbean and lived in Grand Cayman on 7 Mile Beach.
Wow.
And decided I was done with the Western world. I didn't want to be in part of corporate America anymore. I had enough money so I never had to work again, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The sort of the American dream, right? Independently wealthy. But God had something else in mind, as he usually does. And about 6 or 7 years after that happened, I discovered that the people that were managing all the funds had actually embezzled the entire amount of money.
Wow.
And one day we woke up broke. And we went from, millions of dollars in the bank to literally nothing. And of course, it took a long time for them to do it, but they kept manufacturing the bank statements and all this kind of stuff, so it looked like the funds were there until one day it was just all gone. So we went from living on $25,000 a month to zero in one day. And it was really a shock.
Now, how did Skip deal with that from a faith standpoint?
Yeah.
How did you deal with that?
Well, I actually saw that as God's handiwork. I mean, I knew right away that this was God saying, you've been going in the wrong direction. I really wanted you to pay attention to what I wanted you to do. I blessed you with all of this, and you spent it on yourself. So now I'm going to take it away so that you and I can start to develop the relationship that I thought we should have.
Okay.
And my wife, by the way, didn't see it that way. Yeah, it was very devastating for her.
Right.
But we started over,
Okay.
and we were $1 million in debt.
Wow.
And thought we were going to lose everything. Obviously, the Ferraris, the AC Cobra, the house in the Caribbean, all that stuff went.
Right.
We struggled to get by for several years, and in the process, I started working on what does this look like in terms of what's happening with my faith. How do you relate to God when you go through that kind of stuff? Like any tragedy, a child dies, you are injured catastrophically. I mean, all those kinds of things happen in life, and we want to be able to understand what is God doing. So this was my sort of Armageddon. It's where God shows up and says, "Okay, wait a minute, you're going the wrong way, and I need to get your attention." And so He threw me overboard, and I learned how to survive with Him without relying on all the other stuff that I had, all the material possessions that I wanted all my life. And in the process, I started writing about what happened to me, and what was happening to my understanding of Scripture, my relationship with God, and I just started, just making notes and writing a few little things, and I sent it off to some of my friends who knew what was happening, and they found it very encouraging, and they started forwarding it to people, and pretty soon I had people that I didn't even know who would write to me and say, "Hey, if you're writing stuff, would you mind sending it to me? Because I'm really finding it, useful." And that went on for about a year, and I just started writing more and more, and that grew into what is now what I do all the time, full time, which is I have thousands of people all over the world who read what I write about how God is transitioning this long journey of understanding what my faith is like, what the biblical texts really say about what happens when people go through these long periods of recovering, their relationship with God. And it now led to, this year I traveled 165,000 miles to go and teach all over the world. I have readers in 63 countries around the world. I've written 10 books. I've got, I've been on television and radio shows, and all that kind of stuff was never anything that I could have imagined would ever happen. I mean, I thought I was done with all this, right? I thought, yeah, well, I'm finished. But God had something else in mind, and now it's been 13 or 14 years of going down this road, all because He decided that, He needed to change my direction.
Right. Now, listening to your story, people or myself would like to know when did that start in your faith and your belief in God?
Actually, I grew up in a religious home, but I really didn't encounter a personal relationship with God until I was about 19. In between years at college, in the summertime, I did a volunteer missions, went with a volunteer missions organization to Nuku'alofa, Tonga in the South Pacific. And there were a bunch of guys there from New Zealand who were just on fire for God. And I knew that that wasn't me. And so I spent a lot of time talking to them, and in the process realized that, I needed to really make a commitment. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was sitting in an empty soccer field in Nuku'alofa, Tonga, with these guys around me, and we're talking about all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to have this kind of relationship.
Right.
So at 19, that started me on the path. And there were lots of, believe me, there were lots of distractions and divergence, and I got off in the wrong direction several times. I mean, God's really been gracious because He hasn't ever given up on me, and I've wandered away a lot. And, it's the Ferraris and all that kind of stuff were one way to wander, but there's lots of other ways as well.
Right.
But He keeps bringing me back and saying, we got more things to do. So that's pretty much where I am now. It's been a long, long path.
Why don't you tell us about some of the places that you've gone? Because you've been a lot of places and have met a lot of different people.
Yeah,
And had a
actually,
lot of
my
great-
passport is full. I had to put 48 extra pages in it, and it's just about full.
Right.
I've been to every country in Central America. I've been to probably 10 or 12 countries in Asia. I've been all over Africa. I've been to Europe many, many times. I've been to Israel 10 times now. All because of what God's doing. People will just say, we really want to understand more about the Bible. We want to understand what the original languages say. We want to understand how this makes a difference to how we live. Would you come? And then we work that out. So I've been going to South Africa, for example, once or twice, sometimes 3 times a year for now almost 6 years. I've been going to Israel for 8 years. Now I'm teaching in Singapore. I was there last year. I'm going to go back, and I'm teaching a class of Chinese believers in Singapore about this stuff. I'll be doing that twice next year. For the first time, I'm going to Myanmar. I'm looking forward to that. I have one of the really great things about what I do is I run into people people that I call the ones who fell through the cracks. Okay, so nobody actually cares about what happened to them, but because I know what happened to me, somehow God brings these kinds of people across my path, and then because I have this worldwide community, they can step in and help. And I'll give you an example. There's a wonderful woman that I met in Singapore who was a Muslim in Indonesia and was abducted into sex slavery. And when I met her in Singapore, the church where I was instrumental in rescuing her out of that environment. And I talked to her about her story. It was really tragic. I mean, she just was weeping the whole time. It was very, very difficult for her. She had a little boy, and the people in Indonesia threatened her child if she went to the police or did anything like that, right? So she was petrified. Took them a long time to get her out from underneath all that. But now, the wonderful thing now is she has accepted Christ as her Savior. She is in Bible school, and she started a mission called Children Under the Bridge for the children of the women who were abducted, who left their children behind in Indonesia. And she has, this month, I just got a little email from her. She has 70 children that she is the mother for. And we're now, the community, my worldwide community is now supporting her to make sure she has a place to live and providing food and educational materials for these 70 kids. And I'm so thrilled. Next year I'm going to get to go to Jakarta and go meet her and meet these kids. And I'm going to take pictures of all of them, and we're going to put it up on the website. And it's a wonderful story. Out of this tragedy comes something.
You have to come back on the show once you do.
Oh,
okay.
It's such a great story, and it's just one of stories like this that happen all the time to me because I'm traveling all over.
Right. And see, what's interesting is because I grew up in media. I've been in media for a very long time, both radio and television, and I've worked in news. And I understand the whole concept of TV and media. I get that. And people talk about the news, and I get that as well. But I was listening to one of the Christian stations about 2 weeks ago. and no one covered this other than what I heard on the station. ISIS had captured some women, and they were in this building, and they was rescuing them. And ISIS had no idea that little by little that they was taking these women out.
Yep.
Well, the story here was that there were some women in the same room as their captives, but they had no idea that they were there. Okay? But they were rescued. But the moral of the story was that God made them blind to them right there in the room.
Fabulous.
And that they didn't see them, and
Yes.
they didn't know that they were there.
Yep.
Now, everybody, and even them themselves, are trying to figure out, like, how did they not see us?
Yes.
They were right, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but you don't hear those kind of stories.
No.
And so, my question is, do you have any of those type of stories to share with your work around the world? And just I mean, you just shared
I
one.
don't think I have miraculous stories like that, but I have stories of people's lives who were
but you just shared
miraculously
one.
rescued.
I
Right.
mean, but you just shared one.
Yes.
Right, right. Why don't you share a couple more?
Well, I mean, it's just been a series of things that have happened over the years. Some of them, some of them don't have quite the same kind of human interest, but I'll give you another one. I was in Ranquit, Haiti, a little tiny village up in the mountains. There's a missionary compound there. They are the only educational facility for 48,000 people, and they have enough room for 800 students in the morning and 800 students in the afternoon. So those 1,600 students out of 48,000 are the only ones who get up to a 6th grade education.
Wow.
And the reason that they are there is because there's a 90-year-old woman who's been there forever helping these people, come out of voodoo and Rastafarian and all. Right. I mean, all that kind of stuff is around them. In fact, I was in their cemetery, and you can see all the voodoo stuff right there, right? Mm-hmm. So when this 90-year-old woman had her birthday, I happened to be there for her birthday, and I said, what do you want for your birthday present? And she said, I need a road. A road, because there was no road from Pinon to Ranquit. They couldn't get anybody in there. It's a 4-wheel drive. It took 3.5 hours. If somebody got injured, medical services couldn't get there to help anyone because there was no road, right? So I came back to Orlando and said, we got to fix this. And I went to my website, people all over the world, and said, we need to build a road.
Right.
And people came forward. We raised the money, and I talked to the mayor of the city down, the Ranquit, this little village. I talked to the mayor, and he said, "Listen." I said, "Look, I'll just get a bulldozer that I will come down to." He says, "No, please don't do that, because if you do that, first it won't help any of the people down here because they'll just bring other people in to make the road. We need work." So he said, "You get the picks and the shovels, and we'll build a road by hand." Which they did. It took months. And all that time, we employed 100 men to work on the road by hand, a 12-mile road we built by hand. Okay?
Wow.
And we kept 100 families alive because we were paying the men every day to work on the road. That is the only road that survived the hurricane.
Wow.
Because they built it themselves. They built it out. I have a video of these guys taking rocks and putting them in the road so that they won't be washed away. It's amazing. One guy is beating a rhythm on a shovel, and everybody else is singing while they're using picks and shovels. It's fabulous, right?
Wow.
That's a miracle.
Yeah.
And now they have a road into Ranquit, and for the first time they can get medical assistance when somebody gets injured. Okay. It's a great story. So there's lots of stories like that. Okay. And the best part about, I think one of the most thrilling things about what I do now is that in order to be a part of my website, we ask people, you don't come just for the information, because you can go to any site to get lots of information about the Bible. The difference in my website is that you become part of a community. You're a worldwide web community, and the only reason that you're there is because you say, I'm willing to help if I can, when I can. And so if we need a road, people come forward and they say, we want to help. We actually had a family here in the Orlando area. The man lost his job. The woman has an autistic child. Their car got into a wreck, was totaled, and I went to my community and said, we have to help these people. $10,000 came in 24 hours.
Wow.
To help these people. I mean, most of my readers have never met each other, but they know that they're committed to helping, right?
Right.
So what I say is nobody in my community ever falls through the cracks.
Right.
There isn't any issue. I mean, we've paid for funeral expenses, we've paid for hospital bills, we've sent food to people, we paid for people to fly to classes, we've helped people with roads, we've done things to rescue people out of sex slavery, we have helped people in homeless shelters. We not because we have a program,
Right.
but because there's a need.
Right.
And then different people from all over the world say, I want to help with that.
Right.
Right? It's a great and thrilling place to be.
Tell us about your book.
Okay, well, I've written 9 books. I brought a few of them here.
Okay.
This is my latest book. It's called Crossing, The Struggle for Identity. It's the story, everybody knows the story of when Jacob comes to the Jabbok and he has to cross the stream. And it says, after he's moved everything to one side of the stream, it says, and he went back and a man wrestled with him all night. Remember that story where he wrestles, right? Well, that story in Hebrew has all kinds of very odd things happening in it. The translation of that story into English leaves a lot of things out, just because of the way that the Hebrew is constructed. So what I do is I look at that story from a Hebraic perspective, and I ask, what's really happening in this story? And what you discover in this book is that the story isn't really about Jacob. The story is really about what happened between Abraham and Isaac when Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, and how it shaped Isaac's view of who God is, and how that changed the way that Jacob thought about God. So it's a really interesting book about how we discover who we are. Okay. This book actually is the abridged version of this book. Okay. And this is a book called Guardian Angel. It's about the Hebrew idea of the role of women. And the reason there's an abridged version is because this is another really wonderful story. I used to teach quite a bit in El Salvador, and one of the school systems down there heard about what I was doing with empowering women through a biblical worldview, and they asked me to come and speak. And so we translated the book into Spanish, and we started a program with 7,000 teenage girls to teach them about their own worth in God's view, so that they can begin to change the culture that they live in, to stop the drugs and the abuse and the violence, because they don't want to live like that, but the whole culture feeds that. So this was an effort to get them to say, well, we can stand up against that together. I had 800 girls at a time in a room, right, in a big assembly room, speaking to them. I had them all stand up, and we all said together, Yo tengo el poder, I have the power, right? And then I had them all make a promise to each other that they would go out and meet their boyfriends and say to the boyfriend, Yo tengo el poder, right? Don't be messing with me because I have the power. So I'm trying to get them to see that they can shape the culture.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And this book is all about how the Hebraic view of women is so powerful and so enriching and so deep and so different than the kind of Christian idea that women have to take a second place, right? So it's been a really successful and helpful book to people all over the world. And then the last one I brought is just kind of for fun. It's about the Beatitudes, but it's about the Beatitudes in Hebrew, because obviously Jesus didn't speak Greek to a Hebrew audience. Right? So what he said in the Beatitudes is actually said in Hebrew and then translated into Greek and then ultimately translated into English for us. And what I ask is, okay, if he said it in Hebrew, what did it mean in Hebrew? And what it means in Hebrew is so powerful and so deep and so much more than just blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy, or blessed are the poor in spirit. And so I talk about the depth of all of those things. I can guarantee you, if you read this book, you'll never read the Beatitudes the same again.
What now in your understanding of the Hebrew Bible,
Yes.
what did you find more as fascinating versus understanding it versus the Bible itself? What would you consider?
Okay, so Hebrew is a very special language.
Mhm,
It communicates both phonetically, like we do in English,
mhm,
and pictographically. In other words, it's a language where the communication happens because of the structure of the word, not just the meaning of the word.
mhm,
So the way that a word is put together will also give you another level of communication.
mhm,
And then there are two other levels besides that. So you can actually drill down into every single word and discover four levels of meaning in each Hebrew word. It's really a powerful, powerful thing.
wow.
I'll give you just one quick example. There's a particular Hebrew word, chesed. We translate the word as mercy. So, in the Beatitudes, blessed are the merciful,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
But the reason we translate it that way is because the Greek word is elios. But the Hebrew word is chesed, and it doesn't have any English translation. There's no word in English that captures what it means in Hebrew because it means four things all at the same time, right? And
okay.
I talk about all those four things are related to each other, and guess what? Chesed is the most important word in the Hebrew Bible for understanding the character of God. So it's not just about mercy. It's about all of the relationships that God has in covenant and how he expresses himself both in the past and in the future and what that means for how I relate to him. And all that's wrapped up in this little word. In fact, on my bookshelf at home, I have two books on that one word, chesed. Both of the books are more than 200 pages long
Wow.
on one word.
Wow.
So that's what I try to do when I talk about the Hebrew text. I try to help people see how deep it is.
But I mean, every time I hear you talk, I just find that it can be so overwhelming and a little intimidating.
Sure, you just have to take a little piece at a time, right? You start with one verse and you say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that that verse has so much in it.
Right.
And then you go to the next verse. Yeah,
Right.
it's a lifelong journey, isn't it?
Right.
You're never going to get to the end of it.
Now, let me go to you. Let me ask you on a personal level.
Okay.
In this world today that we live in, I, this is my own philosophy thing that I'm talking about now.
Okay.
With this election that, in the time that we talk, we are a new president coming in. This whole president race has, I think, to me, has revealed one of the most important things, and that is the the type of relationship that we have in our faith. I think that has exposed us as a nation. And I say that because I had my pastor on. And every time I would hear Donald Trump speak, because to me he has the right to be who he is. And he has the right to be president. People voted. But this has nothing to do with the presidency. This has to do with the character. And every time he opens his mouth, and I'm kind of like, wow. Because to me personally, people made jokes about, when he said 2 Corinthians, you know, to me, that was sad. It wasn't funny because to me, he has no idea who Christ is, to me. And so when I see him and every time he speaks, that's what I'm thinking. I'm sitting there looking at this man, and I'm like, I feel sorry for him. And I actually pray for this man. People go, well, because they see him. And I'm looking, and then it's like the nation follows. And the nation kind of, in a way to me, is kind of like in the same boat, in a sense. Because, as I said, and I asked my pastor, I said, if you are teaching from this, I had my Bible, and if you believe this, explain to me. And he said, Charles, I myself would like to sit around at the table and have them explain to me how the same thing. So your own personal, your own, no, 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 I'm talking about us as a whole. I'm not even talking about the presidency. I'm talking about our vision
Yeah.
and who we are as a nation and our faith.
Yeah.
How do you see us?
Um,
Just asking your opinion.
okay. I want a little preface.
Okay.
One of the things that I have been privileged to do is to lecture on cruise ships. So I've done a lot of lecturing on cruise ships in the Mediterranean, on Celebrity, Royal Caribbean, Azamara, Silver Sea, right? And I work under contract. And one of the items in the contract is you must never talk about politics, sex, or religion. So now you're asking me to break that contract. No, I understand. This is always a very difficult subject because people are very invested in how they feel about which candidate they voted for. Now, I want to comment on it because I don't want to avoid your question.
No. But let me ask you this right here before you answer the question.
Okay.
In my belief, this is just me. It doesn't matter if you are a shoe salesman, a plumber, a senator, or whoever. I believe that you still have to be accountable for your actions.
I couldn't agree more.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
So I don't see a president, I don't see a senator, I don't see a plumber. I see a child of God, each individual. That's how I see the world.
Yep.
And the question goes back to what I was saying before about being accountable for what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't live my life based on this position, and that's how I view how I'm going to do what I do. I have to do what I do based on what I believe in my faith. Now, how that works out, you do the best that you can. But I still see each individual as a child of God, and you were put here for a purpose. And I don't see Donald Trump any different than I would see anybody else, and you have to excuse this expression, but to me, that if Donald Trump did not have money, if he walked in the room acting the way that they're acting, they would kick him out because they would probably call him trailer trash. That's just my opinion. If he walked in the room with that attitude, acting the way that he acting, and if he didn't have any money, nobody would listen to him. Who would put up with it? So it goes, but that's me. That's my personal opinion.
Okay.
And he's entitled to be himself. Don't have a problem. My question goes to the point of the people who says it's okay. And that's what I'm asking about where we are with it's okay.
Yeah.
If I'm making
I think,
sense.
yeah, I think there are two issues here.
Okay.
The first is the general state of the American population, which I think is just an expression of what's happening in the Western world. We had a little conversation about this, but basically the idea is that the West has progressed. Well, you wouldn't say senators like to talk about progress, but it's actually decline, right? So over the course of 2 millennia, let's say from 500 BC, the Greco-Roman world has been in decline. And I don't mean that our standard of living has declined. What I mean is that our sense of value, our commitment to each other, and our sense of accountability has declined, right? Because we have pursued a Greek idea that I as an individual have rights and entitlements, and it doesn't make any difference what you think, I'm still entitled to those. In other words, we've moved along the pathway that says the most important thing in the world is me. Okay?
Okay.
And as we move down that pathway, we have basically just endorsed what Greek philosophy taught 2,500 years ago, that the center of the universe is man, right? The Greeks would say man is the measure of all things, okay? And the only reason that it hasn't happened any faster than that is because there's been this Jewish Christian layer on top of our society that kept our morality in check, right? It's the icing on the cake has been the morality of the Bible. And as we've removed the Bible from our educational system, from our value system, from our social environment, we have now inherited more and more of the "it's all about me" generation.
The cake.
Right? The cake.
The cake.
The cake is the Greek world of I'm the most important thing here. Okay? Now, that seems to me to give us a pretty good idea of why we are where we are. Because it's all about me. Right? I want what I want when I want it. And if you get in my way, that's your problem. Right? And if I have a society like that, everyone is out for themselves.
Right.
So we end up in a society where if the government's going to give it for free, I'll take it. Because I have no responsibility to anybody else. It's all about me. I'll take care of me first. Right? Well, you know that the biblical world is exactly the opposite. The biblical world is that I must take care of you because you are a child of God, and I have a responsibility to you. Right? We don't see that in our society today because we have followed the Greek path instead of the biblical Jewish Christian path, right? Think about what happened in the history of the United States. It began as an effort for people to find religious freedom, right? In other words, the reason that there is an America is because people fled a religious society in Europe that was restrictive, and they wanted to explore and have a place where they could live out their faith, so they came to America, right? The Plymouth Colony, all these kind of things that happened long before we got to the Constitution. 100 years before that, people were fleeing from religious persecution, okay? So the basis of the United States is this idea that I have a sense of God and a sense of responsibility to my neighbor, okay? But as that deteriorates, the Greek world gets stronger and stronger until I come to the place where I believe I'm entitled to everything, right? Now, that affects elections big time, because all of a sudden I start voting for the people who I think are going to give me the most. And what it means is that the general population begins to absorb the idea that the most important thing in my life is me, and I should just take care of myself, and I'll vote for whoever's going to take care of me, right? In fact, politicians know this very well, because no one votes against a politician who offers anything for free. Right? I mean, think about it.
Right.
I mean, come with me to South Africa. It happens all the time. Every time there's an election in South Africa, all of the megaphones on the back of the pickup trucks, because people don't read, go through all the communities declaring that if you vote for the ANC, you're going to get this for free, and this for free, and this for free. So they vote. And then what happens? They don't get anything,
Right.
because no one has to promise it again until the next time they're going to be elected, right? So, but that idea is about how important life is to me and how I should take care of myself. And if you're going to offer to take care of me, then I'll vote for you. So that process eliminates my deep biblical need, my God-given responsibility for for the neighbor next to me, for the one who's suffering, for the one who needs help. Right?
Right.
I'm sure that you're aware of this, but 150 years ago, the government wasn't involved in welfare. The church was. The local church was the center and the motivator for all welfare that happened in the community. And it happened at the community level. There was no government agency, right? The government took over that agency when it removed that authority from the church, which was a disaster. Because now you give to a government fund and you don't know where the money goes.
Right.
But when it was happening at the local level, you knew the person who needed help. Right? And you knew that if you helped them, they would get on their feet and be the next one in line to help somebody else. So as soon as the government got involved, it removed a responsibility that actually belonged to the religious community. In fact, one of the things that's really interesting about the biblical worldview is that God doesn't like governments taking over the job that he's supposed to do. Right? Okay?
Right.
But we like it because then that helps us remove our obligation to God. And we see that kind of pattern develop as well. Okay, so I think that what we see in this election is just the natural result of a society that's moving in the direction of me. It's, you know, it's the Beatles, I, me, mine. They sang that song a long time ago and they got it right. Right? So I think that what we're seeing is not just you know, a very nasty election.
Right.
What we're really seeing is a society that has adopted the idea that the most important thing in life is what I get from myself.
And what we have
Right.
evolved
Now,
into.
yeah. Now, I would also like to make a comment about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton.
Okay.
In one sense, they're both cut from the same mold.
Right.
Right? It's
Right.
not like
Right.
it's not like I had a choice between good and evil.
Well, hold on.
Wait. But let me finish.
Okay.
You open the door, so now
Okay,
I get to
okay,
finish.
okay.
Okay? Because both of them have money, power, prestige, and status, and you don't get to determine on the basis of their moral character,
Right.
because America doesn't vote on moral character
Right.
anymore.
Right.
America votes on what's in it for me.
Right.
Okay? And so they both promise what's in it for me, and one promise just had more more resonance with the society than the other. But it wasn't like they were promising different things. They're both out there promising. Okay? The situation that I see is a biblical one. And this is going to sound really quite odd, but this is how I view it. I know that there are biblical precedents for God dealing with egomaniacs. Nebuchadnezzar is a perfect example, right? Nebuchadnezzar believes that he has done everything. He has a huge ego. In fact, he says, "Isn't this Babylon that I have created with my hand?" Right? What does God do when he says that? It says, the Lord came to him and said, "This day sovereignty is taken from you." All right? So God was able to reshape Nebuchadnezzar's thinking from being an egotist to being a servant of God, because God even calls Nebuchadnezzar his servant, right? But God was able to do something with a guy who had a big ego and bring him down to the point where he could rebuild him.
Right.
Okay? I wouldn't be surprised to see that kind of thing happen.
Well,
Right?
right.
But God says something very different about people who refuse to honor the truth. And I think this is the dilemma. The dilemma is that an egotist can be humbled, but a person who refused to honor the truth, God has some pretty harsh words for them. So I saw this election a little differently than most people, because I was looking at biblical precedents and things that have happened in empires in the past, and recognizing where we are as a society and saying, you know what, I guess the bottom line is, I would often say America's going to get what it deserves.
Right. Yeah. Well,
And that's
we kind of
that's tragic.
Well, I'm saying we kind of seeing the same thing.
Yes.
And I totally agree with you,
Yeah.
because I was basically I was in the same place as you, and like I said, that's why I said it has revealed us as a country,
Right.
and where we are in relationship to Him. That's why I said that.
Yeah, and what's amazing is if you look at, if you look some of the polls, you'll discover that about 90% of Americans say they believe in God.
Right.
But what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything in terms of how they actually behave,
Right.
right?
Right.
I mean, 2% of the population of America tithes. 2%. 90% believes in God,
Right.
but 2% give any money to the church at all.
Wow.
That is an absolutely shocking statistic that says these people might believe in God, but it doesn't change their lives one bit.
Well,
It doesn't.
Well, there's a difference between believing in God and knowing who God is, right?
Oh, absolutely. But what I'm saying is that 90% of the people say they believe in God, but that 90%, but 88% of that 90 don't think he has anything to do with their lives. I mean, it's
Well,
really quite crazy, isn't
well,
it?
but again, not knowing who he is.
Yeah.
I mean, I can believe in him. I mean, I can believe there's a God, but well, yeah. Okay.
But so what? Now that's the whole problem, isn't it? When you have a society where 90% of the people believe there is a God, but they don't operate on the basis that he actually has any interaction with you or that he holds you accountable for anything or that you're responsible for anything, they might as well not believe in him. I mean, how can you believe that there is a God and he has nothing to say to you?
Well, it blows my mind every day, Skip. I walk around like this sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm like,
So,
what?
so
I'm
I,
like this. I'm
yeah.
like, really?
So I mean, I really think in that sense you're right. It has exposed America's lack of understanding of who God really is, and it certainly has exposed America's lack of responsibility for anyone else.
Oh, okay. Now I have a question for you.
Yeah.
When you travel all over the place and you see all these people, what do they think of America?
Well, you want me to really comment on that? I mean,
Yeah. Especially
I
now.
cannot-
Especially
yes.
now.
I can tell you that most of the people that I interact with overseas are thrilled that Trump was elected.
Really?
Yeah, because they saw the previous administration as a serious decline in America's prestige overseas, and more importantly, America's willingness to protect them. In other words, they saw Trump as someone who potentially will rebuild America's strength overseas because they are counting on America to act as their defense, right? I mean, I can tell you.
But
No, wait.
but he
You're
said the
asking me.
opposite, though. But no, I'm saying, but he said the opposite.
I understand that, but
Okay.
I'm telling you what they think.
Oh,
Okay?
Okay.
So the people in Israel are happy. The people in South Africa are happy. The people in Asia are happy. They're happy because they believe, wait a minute, now I know that there's going to be a very strong America, right? And that will communicate to the people who are threatening us that they better not mess with America's friends. That's how they think. Okay? I understand. You asked me what they think. I'm telling you what they think. I'm not trying to explain it to you, but I can tell you that most of the people that I encounter overseas were very, very thrilled. Unlike what the news would tell you.
Right. I mean, I could understand that if Trump thought that way.
I understand. Unlike what the news tells you,
Right.
unlike what the
Well-
media tells you, if you go talk to the actual people, like I do,
No, I'm not. I'm talking about them understanding Trump's mentality, because the way Trump comes across is like, if you can't pay your way, I'm not protecting you. No kind of way.
I got it. But you realize that I'm talking to people who are already disgusted with their own governments.
Right.
That's a worldwide phenomenon.
Right.
That people are just sick of politics because they feel like no one cares about them.
Right.
And they basically feel like the political machine cares about itself, and the most important job for a politician is to stay in power.
Right.
And so
exactly.
they don't feel like anyone cares about them, so they are hopeful that this major shift will mean that somebody will finally pay attention to what's happening to them.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So, what you got going on next? Where you going next?
Well, as I said, I've done 165,000 miles in the air this year.
Okay.
I have one more trip to Mexico next week. I'm doing actually next weekend. I'm going to be in New Orleans teaching a class of pastors actually on biblical hermeneutics, which will be really interesting. Then I go to Mexico for a little thing, and then I'm back. Over Christmas, I'll be home. On the 4th of January, I go to Singapore. I'm teaching 2 classes in Singapore. I'm going to Myanmar, the Philippines, and Indonesia to see this wonderful woman with the children under the bridge.
Oh yeah, you definitely gotta come back on the show.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
And I would tell the people that are in your audience, if you know, lots of times we give to charities and we don't know what actually happens to the money. Um, this is a wonderful, real person who desperately needs help and is doing an amazing thing for God. And if you want to get involved, you, the audience out there, you know, come to my website and tell me that you want to get involved.
You know what? If you ever get an opportunity to be somewhere and you have access to the internet, we can do it. We can do the show.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you would be interested in that, but I'm so fascinated by you and what you do and where you go and how you do what you do and your relationship with Christ and God and everything. But if it ever crossed your mind to say, I'm going to be such and such place and there's internet and you have a laptop with a camera on it.
Oh, we can do that, yeah.
We can, and we can, trust me, I would love to follow
Sure.
you, keep people abreast of what you're
That
doing.
would be fun.
And to just let people know the wonderful things that you're doing and how God is working around the world and with people. I would love to be able to, tap into you that way.
Okay.
Whenever.
I do need to give you this caution, though. The woman, I've deliberately not used her name because she lives a very dangerous life. First, I mentioned that she was Muslim. So obviously, to be a believer in a dominant Muslim country like Indonesia is already a risk.
Right.
She also has come out of prostitution and sex trade. Right. So the people who are running that, if they knew that she was doing this, would probably, harm her.
Right.
So I don't use her name, and you'll never see a picture of her.
Right.
You will see pictures of the children that she deals with, and when we talk about what she does, we call her Jane. But we have to be really careful because I don't want her to be harmed. Right? I mean, it's a real thing. Right. All right. But yes, I'd be thrilled to do something from overseas. I mean, next year I'm going to be in Africa, in South Africa twice, and I'm taking people. You'll love this. I'm going to take people on a safari because we're going to study the wonder of God in the bush. 100 miles from an electric light bulb, so we can see the Milky Way and hear the lions roaring, and go and see how the entire world is all put together without human beings, everything from a dung beetle and a termite to a cheetah. We're going to see all that. I did this last year. It was fabulous. Wow. The people came and they were thrilled because we talked about what God's wonder is like, and you're in the middle of it. Right. You're not down at Animal Kingdom in Disney. You're actually with the real beasts that live there. We saw elephants and giraffes and hippos and lions and cheetah, and we were right there.
All right. Now, how often do you do this?
I go to South Africa 2 or 3 times a year. Yeah, so the safari for next year is all set. The people are signed up, and we're ready to go, and then probably we'll do it again sometime.
Okay. Now, how long is the safari? How long does it take?
Usually 5 or 6 days. We're in the bush. The longest one I've done is 12 days in Botswana. That was really rough. We were sleeping on the ground, but this one we do. We go to a campsite where they actually have showers and tents and and a kitchen and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice. But you get a chance to really be out with the animals. It's an amazing thing. I cannot tell you, if we ever do video with actual lion pride, I mean, it is an unbelievable experience. There's no way to describe how powerful it is to realize that God's involved in all this kind of stuff, and you're there. It's just really, really amazing.
What, from your own personal, in a way you've answered it. I find it fascinating a lot of times. I'm on YouTube, and I see stories like near-death experiences from different people who are Muslim faith who supposedly died, and there's so many different stories of people who have died, and they came back, and a lot of times their stories are very similar, very, very similar. And I may have asked you this earlier, But do you have any stories of someone who just didn't believe in God at all and had an encounter, and now you
I haven't personally haven't encountered anybody who was a complete atheist and then came to faith. Um, in other words, I don't know their stories, but I just this weekend spent an entire day with a man who was a total atheist and is now completely and utterly involved in ministry to doing all kinds of wonderful things. And I mean, I don't know what his whole story was and how that happened, but I do know that at one point he didn't believe that there was a God at all, and something happened and changed the direction of his life. In fact, he and his wife are considering moving to Israel now. It's really quite an amazing thing.
Wow.
Yeah. But unfortunately, I can't relate any personal stories because I don't know the background of that. Most of the people that I deal with have come out of a church environment, or they grew up in a religious home or something, but they've struggled with how to understand what the Bible really means to them and how the relationship really works.
In your own personal experience in living with this day that God has given us, what is your own personal, I guess, opinion on the work that God is doing, our perception that we have of Him, and the things that you have learned from just people in general in your own living in life, and when it's all said and done?
Yeah, I think...
what is it that you would write and say about Skip and his lessons in life and what he's learned in people and, relationships?
I think that the thing that impresses me the most is that God is so much bigger than we think. I'm pretty sure that He is actively involved with every single person on the planet. And we have a tendency to think that God is only involved with those people who believe like we believe. But my experience is that if I get a chance to sit down and talk with people, and we talk about spiritual things, you can see that God's handiwork is involved in all kinds of lives. I mean, from Buddhist monks to Orthodox rabbis. I mean, I'm all over the board. Because of where I travel. And I see that in one way or another, God is shaping all of those lives to bring them closer to Him in some way. Might not fit our definition of how that works, but, I'm not the one who decides how God does things.
Question, and I don't know how often do you get this question. Is there anything in the Hebrew Bible in reference in the translation of what in reference to hell?
Actually, I did a lecture series on that once in Virginia Beach, and we talked about the origins of the doctrine of hell. Amazingly, the Hebrew scriptures, we're talking about what you would call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, it's called the Tanakh. It has maybe a half a dozen hints at something about an afterlife. It doesn't have a clearly defined idea of heaven or hell. It uses the word Sheol, which is where everyone goes when they die. So it doesn't distinguish between the righteous and the unrighteous. It doesn't talk about punishment for the wicked, all that kind of stuff. All of that idea that ultimately ends up in the New Testament, where there is a clearly defined idea of reward and punishment in the afterlife, all of that begins in what we call the intertestamental period, the period between the close of the prophets and the Gospels, right? That 400 years. And a lot of it comes out of the influence of Hellenism, Greek thought, that makes its way into rabbinic thinking in the 400 years before Jesus shows up. So by the time Yeshua, Jesus, is walking the earth, then you have a concept of heaven and hell. But in the Hebrew scriptures, it isn't there. It's really an interesting thing, an interesting study, right? It means that when Abraham dies, nobody says, oh, Abraham goes to heaven. It says Abraham dies and was gathered to his kin. And the reward for his righteousness was a long life, right? And it's over with. Right? And you go to the next guy. But by the time you get to the New Testament, it's been reworked, so now you have a different idea of what happens afterwards. I mean, I think there's some really important reasons for that. I mean, think about the fact that the children of Israel come out of Egypt, right? I mean, Egypt is absolutely preoccupied with death and the afterlife. The pyramids are monuments to death and the afterlife, right? You put the Pharaoh in there when he dies, and you put all his servants in there, and his dogs, and his cats, and his food, and his wives, and everybody else, and you seal it up, because he needs all that stuff in the afterlife, right? So when the children of Israel come out of Egypt, God basically draws a line in the sand and says, hey, I don't want you to think about what's going to happen afterwards. You pay attention to what's happening today. Your life is about this world. And stop being preoccupied with what's going to happen in the next one. I'll take care of that. You worry about this one. Right? And it's a huge shift out of Egyptian thinking. And it stays with the Hebraic idea all the way through the prophets. It takes another 400 years after the close of the prophets before you start to get this idea coming back about a reward and punishment in the afterlife. There's a lecture on my website. If you are really interested, it'll take you through all of the discussion in the verses, and we look at how the ideas were generated and where they came from and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, tell us a little bit more about your website.
Yeah, the website is just my name, skipmoen.com, skipmoen.com. It started with this process of just talking about my journey through scriptures and trying to understand them. So there's now about 6,000 word studies on there, Greek or Hebrew words, what they mean, how they were translated, what they meant to the original audience, how that affects what we think about the scripture. So there's 6,000 of those, as one added every day. There are lots and lots of, there's over 100 articles like hell, right, the doctrine of hell, all kinds of things. There's a wide variety of stuff in the articles, and then there are video series, there are audio series, and then there's the 9 books that I've written. And the best part about the website is that there's an active blog. So people can read every day, and then they comment on what they've learned or question what we're talking about, and those readers come from all over the world, right. And then people interact with each other. So there's this sort of active community going on that I just get kick-started every morning because I write something, and then they go and take off and
right.
And develop it, and it's really kind of fun.
I don't know if I asked you this earlier, but what is the most fun part of your world and what you do?
The best part of my world is being able to travel all over the world and meet people who are actively seeking to understand God. That's the thrill. Okay. That's why I keep getting on the plane and flying 36 hours to get there, and because when I get there, these people are hungry for understanding who God is, and that makes it all worthwhile.
Okay, this is my last question, because I've had you here for a while. This is my last question. What's the difference between Skip and the 3 Ferraris and Skip now?
Oh, my goodness. Sometimes I wish I had the yellow one back. That was a great car. At a 355 GTS, with the open top. It was fun. And there are a couple of days in Florida where I think, boy, it would sure be nice to drive that again. But the difference is just a complete redirection of life. When I had the Ferraris, my wife would say to me, how come you're so depressed? Mm-hmm. And she says, why don't you just take one of the cars, go for a drive? And I would say, yeah, but I don't have any purpose in life. I have everything I wanted. I mean, I got more than what I wanted. I have a house in the Caribbean, 3 Ferraris in the garage, an AC Cobra. If I really want to, burn rubber, I can go and ride in the AC Cobra. A tennis court in my backyard, a gym upstairs, all that kind of stuff, right? And it was like, so what was the purpose for all this? Right. I have it all. I used to lecture to guys who wanted to be millionaires, right? And I would say, listen, you think you're afraid now because you won't be a millionaire. When you get to be a millionaire, you'll be more afraid because you can always lose it, right?
Right.
And now your whole life is wrapped up in this objective of being a millionaire. When you get there, you're going to realize, so what's next, right? And that was my life.
What's
Now I have a purpose that will never be fulfilled, never be satisfied, because there's always going to be more people who want to know, and I get to be involved with them. So now I really have something that will propel me for the rest of my life. It's just a real, real difference.
Yeah, and it's funny too because you said something that one of deacons said that in Bible study, and when he said it, I understood it, and I don't know if I can quite quote him what he said, but he said God put in us to have a relationship with Him, and that is one of the main reasons why we're here in the sense of our existence, and we don't quite understand if we don't seek Him what is that missing piece.
Yes.
Because we're always in search of something.
That's right.
And there's an emptiness that's there, and we're always trying to fulfill it
Yep.
with something other than Him.
Yep. Actually, this book, Crossing,
Uh-huh.
is really about Jacob trying to fill his life with a purpose other than what God wanted.
Right.
And that's why he has to encounter the man and fight his way through the whole night, because he's struggling with who am I?
Right.
Right? And I think we all get there. We all get to the point where, you know, we have satisfied those things that we thought life was about, and we realize that it's empty, and there has to be more.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Skip, I am truly blessed and thank you so much, because the more you talk, the more I realize how I've been blessed today. Because you took the time
Thank you.
to come and hang out with me.
Yeah, thanks.
And so I'm realizing, like, oh, well, God is good. It's like, wow. So,
Well, when I go see the woman with the children under the bridge, I'll have to come back and tell you what happened. I mean,
Right.
that's just,
oh, yeah.
it's
right.
amazing stuff.
Yeah, bring some pictures of the kids.
I will.
So we can definitely, see. But I want to thank you and appreciate you. And please, you got to come back on the show, because I still think there's so much that you still haven't shared with us.
Okay.
Because there's so much in what you do. And you just a walking encyclopedia of knowledge that more people need to hear you, but more importantly, they need to feel your spirit and knowing that,
Oh, thank you.
knowing that you're real.
Thank you.
Because there's a lot of people who can talk the talk, but it's kind of like when I was working with Dave Washington, at Restore, and the kids there could feel the people that would come there for a picture.
Yes.
Versus them coming there because they care about the kids.
Yeah, sure.
And the kids knew, be like, no, man, you just here to take a picture with us, man.
Yeah.
But the ones that they felt in their heart,
Sure.
and you could tell in your spirit that
Yeah.
you believe in what you believe in, and you have this passion to serve. And
Yeah, I think a lot of that it comes about because you have to have lived through some pretty tough times in order to know what people really struggle with.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
There's a purpose in all of it, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you and appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right. All right. I'm Charles Morrison. Again, we want to thank Skip, and throughout the show, have his website up, and if people, the information, if they want to contact you, is definitely on the website.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to thank Skip again, and thank you for watching. I'm Charles Morris with the Journey 2020.